All right, everyone, as duly predicted when these race riots began all over the United States and in some cases in other countries now, the left is doing what predictably it was going to do, which is when you get a group of people, political fanatics, the far, far left, this is like the beyond Elon Omar fringe, and you just sort of let them run wild, they tend to go into a purity spiral. This has happened on the right. This is why, the remnant of the alt-right, a lot of it collapsed. And this certainly happens to left-wing groups as well. It's looking more and more like Trump's strategy of sitting back and letting the cities that are run by Democrats expose themselves as completely inept while allowing the left to purity spiral is actually going to work because there was a funny tweet. Like 2 years ago, Trump was tweeting when they were attacking the Confederate statues. He was like, well, they're going to go after Washington next. Now, indeed, elements of the left that are not content with fighting bigotry in the form of confederacy, but really they want to erase and rewrite all of history, and that's the ultimate goal, are doing just that. And they've been allowed to run wild to the point where the fringe of the crowd is now in command. And they're actually like toppling Jefferson statues and trying to rename universities and so forth named after like George Washington. Now, this may be fashionable to a handful of people on the far left, but that is definitely not something that mainline average Americans support. Politically speaking, this is a hot potato for the left. Not just for the left. Think about the position that people like Pelosi are in. We've seen this before. Trump capitalized upon the AOC New Green Deal sort of era there, forced them to put them in as sort of the face of the party, to the point where for a while there he was booing his own support, mainly by running against Elon Omar and AOC and Rashida Tlaib, fanatics like that. Pelosi realized this, attempted and failed to rein them in, and eventually that issue sort of went away because I think behind the scenes probably money was paid. But did lasting damage. Definitely that'll play a role in the upcoming election. Now Trump gets to run against people toppling statues of Thomas Jefferson. Well, that's going to make the average American, number one, angry, number two, fearful. Some Americans hold off supporting Trump because they've been told he's this massive dictator wannabe bigot, and so it kind of makes them nervous. But when they see that it's the left that's literally attempting to destroy statues dedicated to our first president, or who I would argue the greatest president, Thomas Jefferson, a liberal individual, by the way, an intellectual, very progressive individual for his era. When it's not enough to remove Confederacy statues, or statues dedicated to someone who was legitimately crazy, like Leopold II, but it goes on to someone like George Washington, I don't think that's going to work. Like when they were attacking that statue over there in, in London, they have an Abraham Lincoln statue, and they were defacing that as well. Think about how the neoliberals, though, have to deal with this. People like Pelosi and the Clintons and the Obamas, then, they're not part of that fringe left. They don't really care if Washington's statue's there. I guarantee you that they don't really care as well if statues of Confederate leaders are there. They just pretend and virtue signal for political points. That being said, how are they going to deal with this? On the one hand, they can piss off the far left, causing more fracturing within the Democratic Party. On the other hand, they can side with them, and then it makes, the average independent American will break 9-1 for the GOP at that point, because they're literally attempting to attack the stuff related to presidents of the United States. Now, I would point out, none of these people are attempting to topple an FDR statue, despite the fact that he was a self-avowed bigot who tossed hundreds of thousands of U.S. citizens and lawful residents into concentration camps based on a faulty intel premise, number one, but partially on his own personal bigotry against people of Asian heritage. Used all sorts of colorful language for them. You want a racist president of the United States to worry about? Worry about FDR, some of those others. Or I think it was Woodrow Wilson, I think was one of them, one of our failed presidents. The idea of removing Jefferson's statue because he owned slaves makes absolutely no sense. If you're going to do that, if you're going to measure people in the past based on modern premises, virtually everybody falls short. Marx was also a bigot and a pervert, among other things, and a complete loser. Sort of reminds me of a perverted version of Bernie Sanders, actually. Again, grifted off of Engels, who actually worked and had some intellectual issues with anthropology. Why don't you remove his statue? That'd be really funny. The left and finally the left gets so fanatic that they start removing Marx statues based on the fact that he was a bigot. They start removing Stalin statues based on the fact that he was engaged in domestic violence against his wife. He was a sexist. That would be funny. Didn't he have his mom killed or something? Stalin was a weirdo. But they're overstretching wildly. This is going to become a big issue, and I think I see the strategy beginning to form, which is that Trump is giving them enough rope to hang themselves. He's getting all sorts of great campaign ad footage right now, and he doesn't even have to worry about it. Look, these losers are too disorganized, number one, and far too unnumerous, number two, to actually take over a city. They've got a few blocks of Seattle right now that they are occupying, which is to say that they're pissing off everyone in the city and making a spectacle that's easily exploited for political gain while not really amounting to anything. They've burned some businesses, but by and large, incompetent cities, they're being jailed en masse. They're making a mockery of the idea of a COVID response because you've got thousands, tens of thousands of people holding protests, and in many cases devolving into looting and thuggery. If that's the case, the average American, I hate to say it, but the average American is intelligent enough, I think, to understand that once you get a fringe movement trying to remove statues of George Washington, that group is not a group that you want in any position of doctrinal power. The problem is that the Democrats have done nothing to disavow these people. In fact, they've applauded it. Oh yeah, these are protests of peace, they say, about Chaz, where people are getting raped and local businesses attacked and strong-armed. That's going to play really, really well politically. Again, it's always darkest before dawn. I'm not a trust the plan sort of person, and I'm certainly not a MAGA hat wearing person. But I see what's going on, and I'm chuckling because people on the left think that they've been handed a mandate to destroy all U.S. history, essentially. That's basically what they're trying to do. Look, if George Washington, again, 2 years ago when they were removing the Confederate statues and stuff, the Democrats crowed about it and talked about how wonderful it was. And when Trump himself, by the way, pointed out that next they'll go for George Washington, these people called him a conspiracy theorist. Oh, you're just being hyperbolic. These are statues dedicated to Confederate leaders. We're not talking about that. That was a U.S. president you're talking about. They're literally trying to remove it now. And Thomas Jefferson. They'll go for others. When Abraham Lincoln's fucking statue gets vandalized in another fucking country, by the way, when Winston Churchill gets hidden from the public because they're afraid someone will blow it up or hit it with a car, don't you think there's a fucking fanaticism problem on the left? Everyone keeps rambling about Nazis, the far right is extreme, oh my god, far right is growing. Look, there are people out there declaring themselves communists and anarchists, destroying statues of your presidents, and you're being oblivious. But people are beginning to wake up because, again, the old legacy media that stubbornly refuses to use the term riot to describe this kind of behavior, or looting, or vandalism, or arson, and persists in calling them protests. These are acts of protest. Burning Wendy's down is a protest, very organized and peaceful. People are no longer paying attention to that bullshit, though. They're paying attention to online creative communities and things like that, and talking in forums. I've said for years that if you want to know the measure of what people really think, pay attention to 4chan. You want to go to a place where people are anonymous, where they can say what they really feel without fear of repercussion. That's why all of these big mainline Silicon Valley sites and the legacy media constantly attack any forum that's anonymous as dangerous, because it shows you what people really feel. You know what people really feel? The rioters are a bunch of hooligans, thugs, atrocious human dregs. They're not protests. The protests that do exist, by and large, yeah, that's perfectly fine, but then they become cringy. That's what the average person thinks. That's the average view of a person in this world, collectively writ large. Not, oh, these protesters here, protests of peace. Yes, we need to destroy George Washington because, I don't know, he didn't free the slaves on day one. He didn't decide to ignore half the constituency back in the 1700s when slavery was common all around the world. Now it's only common in countries where the Clinton Foundation has a foothold. That's about all. Peace out.